know I'm long overdue to review this movie since obviously I'm a huge comic book fan and I've anticipated this one somewhat. But after watching the trailers, I was a little skeptical on this one. I liked the first one a lot, The Amazing Spider-Man, but the sequel didn't really impress me, well, at least judging by the trailers. The movie, on the other hand, I thought was pretty good. I've heard mixed reactions on this one from what I've heard, and I went to see it, and I thought it was pretty good, but not great. In other words, it had its quirks, and it obviously doesn't really live up to what the first one did. People can argue whether they like this series or the one directed by Sam Raimi with Tobey Maguire better. But as I said, comparing these two franchises is like to me, it's like comparing the Christopher Nolan version of Batman to the Tim Burton series of Batman movies. Two completely different franchises, just taking a different approach. This one obviously takes a different approach, if you can really say that, with, of course, Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker, and it's more or less about developing the character a lot more. One thing I did like is it shows actually what happened to his parents at the beginning. I apologize for spoilers in this review. And it more or less develops the mystery that was pretty much shown unsolved in the first one. Not to mention it brings in more villains, which I'm kind of glad they didn't recycle the Green Goblin. Of course they bring him in, even though it's Harry Osborn, not Norman Osborn, and of course everything's changed around this time around with the Osborns, and not to mention they got Electro. He's pretty much the main villain in this movie. From what I heard, it was supposed to be Rhino, but he doesn't really make an appearance till the end of the movie, so I'm happy to say that this doesn't really suffer from, like, Spider-Man 3 syndrome. People can argue that that movie was overstuffed with too many villains, and to me, this one was kind of a little overstuffed as well. I mean, yeah, I felt the love story was a little bit quirky at some parts. I felt some of the acting was a little bit iffy. It was not mastered 100% well, and this is what kind of slows the movie down in his relationship as well with Harry Osborn. It did have its slowdown parts. I didn't feel that the Electro character was fully developed well, but, it had its good fight scenes in the movie as well, and it tries, I can tell. It definitely does. Of course, it does clock over 2 hours, which, was to be expected, and I think it's around the same time as the first movie. That as well did have some slow parts, even though I more or less praised that movie over this one. I just felt with the love story, it kind of like went around in different circles, and it had its quirks, but I'm glad they didn't overstuff the villains too much. Electro, to me, as I said, was the main villain in this movie, but of course Rhino is at pretty much the end of the movie, even though you see his character before he fully becomes Rhino at the beginning, and it pretty much hints a sequel, which of course there's supposed to be 2, and I'm not going to be surprised if he comes back, played by Paul Giamatti, and of course Electro, as you know, is played by Jamie Foxx. So, would I say this movie's really great? Well, it didn't make a lot of money, but that's not really saying much. I'd say it's worthwhile, just at least, I'd say unless you're a die-hard fan, you may or may not like it. I enjoyed it. It's not great. It's forgettable for some parts, but it's enjoyable. No, there's no post-credit scene in this movie, unlike the first one, but they hinted the sequel at the end of it. And I apologize again for these spoilers. But the action scenes were pretty cool, and, you could tell a lot of it was all CG effects, and that's what you'd really expect out of these comic book movies. But overall, I'd say it was a pretty satisfying and worthwhile adventure. You can argue that it's not the best of the Marvel Comics movies, but I'd say it's pretty decent. And I think I give it a fair rating of, well, just a plain 2 remotes up. I think that's fair enough. So, till next time, keep watching.
Get over